First question for you. Can you tell the difference between these three gameplay captures of Wild Hearts S on the Nintendo Switch 2? Happy launch day, by the way. One of them is pretty obvious. At least it will be if you're watching this video at its source resolution on an appropriate and decent screen, but they all are different in a very basic way. I'll give you a hint. This one is the game running with the Switch 2 dock set to a forced output of just 720p. The other ones, well, you can probably safely assume one of them's going to be 4K and the other one's going to be 1080p, but which is which? Can you see the difference? What if we zoom right in? How about now? You see the difference yet? I mean, the game itself doesn't actually run internally at either 4K or even 1080p native, so it's perhaps not too shocking that the visual difference between the 4K output from the dock and the 1080p output from the dock are basically identical. But the reason I ask, the reason for this comparison, is because over the last few days, a story has broken about Hitman on the Switch 2, behaving quite strangely depending on the dock output mode. Mainly, forcing it to 720p gives you a noticeable boost to frame rates. And there's a small but still measurable difference between 1080p and 4K output modes as well. Which again, the dock output mode shouldn't, in theory, be affecting games like this, which don't even run at those resolutions natively anyway, so it's all very curious. But, spoiler alert, it's only about to get more curious and bizarre, frankly. Because in response to the Hitman malarkey, someone left a comment on yesterday's video where I looked at the performance of Wild Hearts S in its release form, as opposed to the earlier videos I did based on the demo, and someone told me a YouTube channel called Switch Up, which I do come across occasionally but don't watch regularly, tested this effect with Wild Hearts S in their own review video. So I watched the video to see what happened, and it was mentioned very briefly. They did extremely minimal testing, and there was literally seconds of actual test footage with frame rate analysis going on there. They glanced over it so quickly, so not very useful, I'm afraid. Anyway, obviously I wanted to test all this myself and have some extensive testing, so there's actually some substantive stuff out there for you guys. I did a full hunt with every resolution output mode the Switch 2 even supports: 720p, 1080p, 1440p, and of course 4K. All of my previous testing was in the 4K output mode, and that's simply the default my Switch sits at in its automatic mode because it's connected to a 4K capture card and a 4K screen, so that's where it defaults to. And that's why I started with those comparison shots, because if there is no visually detectable difference between 1080p and 4K output for this game, but you get better frame rate performance in 1080p, well, that's a bit of a no-brainer choice, isn't it? Of course you would choose 1080p. Better performance, exactly the same visuals. So, our baseline is the 4K output mode, which in various tests in various areas, including the secondary in the game, as shown in my release version performance test video I uploaded, well, less than a day ago at this point, we are averaging 45 FPS throughout pretty much all the areas. That seems to be the target for the otherwise free-floating unlocked frame rate. And to my mild surprise, yes, indeed, forcing the dock into 1080p output mode does seem to have a mild effect on boosting the average FPS. I'm not sure I would call it significant, as the general feel of the gameplay doesn't actually change much between these two experiences. In fact, I'd wager most people couldn't even tell. But again, given that there is zero visual sacrifice being made, not even to the UI overlay text, which is one of the benefits of running games at 4K quite often, even if the game itself doesn't internally render at 4K or even anywhere close to it, the overlay often is, so you get cleaner, sharper UI elements, icons, text, that kind of thing. But seems this game doesn't play by those rules. So yeah, no-brainer, 1080p better. But how about 720p though? Can we maybe hope for as much as 60 FPS? That magical, beautiful 60 FPS that some people are so latched onto that a game feels unplayable unless you hit it, which is it's a weird hill to die on, but you know, you do you. Well, for a start, even if it did, I would not be willing to make this much visual sacrifice because unlike the 1080p to 4K comparison, 720p absolutely does rather significantly negatively impact the visual presentation. And I might even not mind so much doing that to the gameplay because, well, it's not, you know, the crispest, most beautiful photorealistic game to begin with. But the fuzzy text and icons that come from running the UI at 720p, yeah, that absolutely bothers me enough not to want to go this way. Plus, as it turns out, as you can see, unlike the weird Hitman example where they got better and better performance as they stepped down, Wild Hearts does not get a significant frame rate boost for making the 720p sacrifice. In fact, bizarrely, it's noticeably worse. Like, much worse, plummeting down to the low 30s instead of the mid 40s. And you feel it too. Oh boy, do you feel it. Frame times are all over the place. Uneven frame pacing at these kinds of frame rates does not feel good, kids. Which just goes to show you there's more than meets the eye going on. Weird Transformers reference in the middle of my spiel. Thanks, brain. There's something else going on with this phenomenon is what I'm trying to get at. It's tied in with how the upscaler is working, how the internal resolution works, the game engine itself, and most likely, if any bottlenecks exist in the GPU, the CPU, or both. There is no one solution for all games kind of thing going on here. There's no point setting your Switch to 720p and just letting it run for all games, because apparently it makes some games worse. So, one mystery left, 1440p, in some ways the most ideal output choice for the Switch 2, as it's only here that the 120Hz output option becomes available. This game, of course, doesn't need 120Hz, and without VRR output anyway from the dock, there's no real benefit to it. Pity, because in a world where VRR dock output works, and a 120Hz screen, well, that'd do this game a lot of favors. It'd be great. In any case, as you've been seeing, the effect on performance makes it all a non-issue anyway, with frame rates that are a little bit worse than even 4K mode, especially during traversal for some reason. It's all super weird the way this game behaves with all of this. I wonder if Digital Foundry is going to do a deep dive on the technical nitty-gritty of exactly why this weird shit is going on. I mean, it'll be dry and boring and probably delivered with what lately has been some fairly pervasive excess of smarm and giggling pettiness from the DF guys that seems to be turning a lot of people against them lately. Remember when we all love those guys? Yeah, not so much anymore, I guess. I kind of think they've forgotten that games are meant for fun. You know what I mean? But still, they do have the right skill sets. You know, they're smart guys. They've got the right brains and tools for breaking all this down and figuring out exactly what's going on, even if it's only interesting and useful on paper. But in the real world, where I live, for now at least, where we enjoy games for being games, not laboratory rodents to dissect, well, end of day, smartest choice is, of course, to hit your Switch's system settings for output, lock it into a manual 1080p selection, and squeeze out a small fistful of extra frames, keeping you more fluid more often. I mean, again, most people, I think, will barely notice the difference in feel, much less the visual presentation, but, again, considering we are not losing a single damn pixel by doing this anyway, we're only getting benefits, you might as well. Hopefully this has been interesting, useful, or at very least entertaining. I am Bloody. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the patrons, and I will catch you next time. Hop over to Twitch, where I'll be streaming this game today.